We are witnessing a masterclass in political theater and rhetorical warfare that transcends the usual partisan bickering of cable news. To understand the gravity of the confrontation between Senator John Kennedy and Jessica Tarlov, one must strip away the red and blue filters and observe the mechanics of the ambush. This was not merely a debate about education policy or rural funding. It was a live dissection of the modern divide between technocratic credentialism and populist intuition. From a strictly analytical perspective, what unfolded in the Fox News studio was a textbook example of a false flag retreat followed by a devastating counteroffensive. The scenario provides a rare glimpse into how veteran politicians utilize the underestimated folksy persona to disarm and dismantle opponents who rely too heavily on academic signaling. We begin by examining the battlefield itself. The studio environment is designed for rapid-fire, soundbite-driven conflict, a setting that usually favors the quick-witted, aggressive interrupter. Jessica Tarlov, armed with her PhD and a rapid-fire delivery style, thrives in this ecosystem. She entered the segment operating under the assumption that speed and volume of data equate to dominance. Conversely, Senator Kennedy, with his deliberate, drawling cadence and rumpled appearance, seemingly entered as the slower, weaker combatant. This visual and auditory contrast was the first component of the trap. In strategic terms, Kennedy effectively camouflaged his capabilities, inviting Tarlov to overextend her position. The inciting incident, Tarlov's challenge for Kennedy to take an IQ test, was a high-risk gamble that violated a fundamental rule of political debate: never ask a question to which you do not know the answer. By introducing the metric of intelligence into a policy debate, Tarlov shifted the ground from subjective political opinion to objective, measurable capability. This is a dangerous pivot. When debating policy, one can always retreat to moral arguments or differing interpretations of data. When debating raw intelligence, there is no gray area, there is only a score. A neutral observer must question the strategic wisdom of this move. It suggests a level of intellectual hubris where the challenger assumes that their opponent's differing worldview is a result of cognitive deficiency rather than a difference in values. Kennedy's immediate reaction, or rather, his lack of one, was the first indicator that the trap had been sprung. He did not bristle, he did not shout, and he did not act offended. Instead, he introduced the prop, the sealed manila envelope. In the theater of the mind, a physical prop is incredibly powerful. It anchors the audience's attention and creates a ticking clock mechanism. As long as that envelope remained on the table, sealed and mysterious, Tarlov was no longer in control of the narrative arc. Kennedy was. As the exchange progressed, we observed a classic case of doubling down, or the sunk cost fallacy in real time. A more cautious debater might have sensed the danger posed by the envelope and attempted to de-escalate or pivot back to the safety of policy nuances. Tarlov, however, pressed forward, demanding validation of her premise that expertise matters and data matters. Here, the analysis requires us to look at the definitions being used. Tarlov defined expertise through the lens of institutional validation, degrees, peer-reviewed studies, and standardized metrics. Kennedy, while not explicitly rejecting these, began to frame them as insufficient without the context of reality. This is a standard populist rhetorical device, but Kennedy executed it with surgical precision. He did not dismiss data. He questioned the interpretation of data by those who lack field experience. When he asked her about the specific limitations of the Stanford study or the difference between correlation and causation, he was not just stalling. He was stress-testing her own standard. Tarlov claimed that qualification comes from analytical rigor. By failing to immediately identify the limitations of the study she cited, she allowed Kennedy to create a fissure in her armor. He effectively demonstrated that memorizing a study's conclusion is not the same as understanding its methodology. The psychological warfare peaked when Kennedy forced Tarlov to explicitly agree to the terms of the wager before the reveal. This is a technique often seen in legal cross-examinations. The attorney locks the witness into a specific line of reasoning before introducing evidence that contradicts it. Kennedy made Tarlov confirm, on the record, that she believed in the validity of testing, that she believed in transparency, and crucially, that she believed she was the smartest person at the table. By getting her to verbally commit to these positions, He ensured that any subsequent victory on his part would not just be a win for him, but a total repudiation of her judgment. If he had simply opened the envelope immediately, it would have been a stunt. By waiting, by making her reiterate her confidence multiple times, he transformed the reveal into a judgment on her character, not just her intellect. The neutral analyst must note the discipline required to maintain this slow burn. In an era of 10-second tick-tock attention spans, Kennedy held the room hostage for minutes, dragging out the silence, forcing the audience to lean in. He was manipulating the pacing of the show itself, slowing down the frenetic energy of cable news to the speed of a Southern front porch conversation, forcing Tarlov to play at his tempo, not hers. Furthermore, we must scrutinize the content of the trap itself. The envelope contained not just a generic IQ score, but a comprehensive cognitive assessment supervised by a reputable institution. This detail is significant. Had Kennedy produced a Mensa certificate or an online test result, it could have been dismissed as trivial. By citing the Institute for Cognitive Evaluation and Dr. Margaret Chun of Harvard University, he co-opted the very authority that Tarlov reveres. He used the credentials of the elite establishment to validate his standing, thereby neutralizing Tarlov's ability to attack the source. It was a maneuver of using the opponent's momentum against them, political judo. He did not defeat her with common sense alone. He defeated her with elite data, wrapped in a common sense package. This destroyed the binary narrative Tarlov was attempting to construct, which posited that one is either smart and educated or folksy and ignorant. Kennedy proved one could be folksy and hyper-intelligent, a hybrid archetype that is particularly dangerous in American politics because it appeals to both the working class and the educated skeptic. The role of the other panelists, while secondary, provided essential context for the viewer. Jesse Waters and the others acted as surrogates for the audience, their reactions validating the shifting tides of the debate. When the camera cut to Brad Stevens smirking or Lisa Wong looking concerned, it signaled to the home viewer that the norm was being violated. Usually, these segments end in a draw with both sides shouting over each other. The silence that fell over the studio as Kennedy prepared to open the envelope was palpable. It represented a breach in the formula. For a moment, the performative aspect of the show dropped, replaced by genuine suspense. This is the viral factor. Content goes viral not when it follows the script, but when it breaks the fourth wall or defies the expected outcome. Kennedy's dismantling of Tarlov worked because it felt unscripted, even though the presence of the envelope proves it was premeditated. It was a planned accident, a calculated exposure of reality that felt spontaneous. Let us dig deeper into the concept of credentialism as a liability. In modern political discourse, there is a growing sentiment that academic credentials do not automatically translate to competence. Tarlov became the unwitting avatar for this vulnerability. Her reliance on "I know the policy" and "I have the degrees" sounded hollow when juxtaposed against Kennedy's questions about the reality of rural school districts. From a neutral standpoint, this does not mean Kennedy's policy positions are correct or that Tarlov's are wrong. It simply means that in the battle of optics, reality almost always trumps theory. Kennedy's question about the specific struggles of rural teachers, funding, burnout, the disconnect between Washington rules and classroom realities, served to ground his intelligence and empathy. He was demonstrating emotional intelligence, EQ, alongside cognitive intelligence, IQ. By contrast, Tarlov's focus on cognitive thresholds and statistical literacy made her appear cold and detached. In the court of public opinion, the leader who understands the pain of the constituent is often perceived as smarter than the leader who can merely calculate the data of the constituent. Kennedy understood that the definition of smart was up for grabs, and he redefined it in real time to exclude her and include him. The climax of the segment, the reading of the results, was delivered with a lack of fanfare that amplified its impact. Kennedy did not gloat. He did not do a victory lap. He read the numbers with the dryness of an accountant reading a tax return. 98th percentile, 99th percentile. This understated delivery was the final nail in the coffin of Tarlov's argument. If he had been arrogant in victory, he would have justified her initial dislike of him. By remaining humble and quiet, he maintained the moral high ground. He forced the audience to look at Tarlov and see a bully who had been put in her place, rather than seeing two politicians bickering. The specific metrics, verbal comprehension, analytical reasoning, were chosen to directly refute Tarlov's specific accusations. She had accused him of lacking analytical capability. The test proved he was in the top 3% of the population in that exact metric. The specificity of the rebuttal left no room for interpretation. It was a total, empirical defeat delivered via the very scientific method Tarlov claimed to champion. We must also consider the persuasion element. Kennedy mentioned that the envelope had been sealed for months, waiting for this moment. This implies a level of strategic patience that is rare. It suggests that Kennedy and his team had profiled Tarlov, and pundits like her anticipated this exact line of attack and prepared a dormant countermeasure. This turns the event from a reactive moment into a proactive operation. It reveals Kennedy not as a passive participant in the news cycle, but as an active predator waiting for the right prey to cross his path. He knew that eventually, someone would call him stupid because of his accent. He banked on their prejudice. He weaponized their bias. This is the hallmark of a high-level political operator. He allowed Tarlov to project her biases onto him, knowing that the heavier she leaned into them, the harder she would fall when the prop was revealed. It is a reminder to all political analysts that in the era of performative politics, the character on stage is often a mask, and the person behind the mask is often playing a game far more complex than the one being aired on television. As the segment concluded, the silence in the studio was the loudest sound of all. It was the sound of a narrative shattering. The Tarlov effect, the ability to use rapid-fire facts to overwhelm opponents, had hit a brick wall. The Kennedy paradox, the high IQ man playing the low-status character, had been validated. For the neutral observer, this 60-minute analysis isn't about who is right on education reform. It is about the brutal efficiency of a well-executed political ambush. It serves as a cautionary tale for anyone entering the public arena. Check your assumptions at the door, never mistake style for substance, and above all, never challenge a man to a game of poker if you don't know what he's holding in his other hand. The envelope was not just paper. It was a mirror, and when Kennedy held it up, Tarlov didn't like what she saw reflected back. The immediate aftermath of the reveal is just as critical to our analysis as the ambush itself. In the study of political communication, we often focus on the knockout punch, but the true measure of victory lies in how the winner manages the room after the opponent has fallen. Senator Kennedy's behavior in the seconds following the reading of his cognitive assessment scores demonstrates a high level of emotional discipline, a trait often absent in modern performative politics. He did not spike the football. He did not engage in the kind of triumphant mockery that generates short-term social media engagement but alienates moderate viewers. Instead, he folded the paper with the same deliberate slowness he used to open it. This action signaled closure. It was a nonverbal cue that the debate was over, not because time had run out, but because the central premise of the opposition had been annihilated. By returning the paper to his pocket, he symbolically put away the weapon, returning the room to a state of uneasy neutrality. Let's scrutinize the specific data points Kennedy chose to highlight. Analytical reasoning, 97th percentile, and verbal comprehension, 99th percentile. These were not random metrics. They were a direct response to the specific insults Tarlov had leveled at him. She had attacked his ability to process complex policy, analytical reasoning, and implied his linguistic style reflected a lack of sophistication, verbal comprehension. By scoring in the top 1% for verbal comprehension, Kennedy didn't just prove he was smart. He proved that his "ah shucks" dialect is a choice, not a limitation. This distinction is vital for the neutral observer to grasp. It implies that every folksy metaphor, every slow-drawn vowel, and every humorous anecdote is a calculated rhetorical device designed to disarm. He is a linguistic shapeshifter, capable of speaking the language of Oxford and the language of the Bayou with equal fluency. Tarlov's error was assuming that speaking the latter meant an inability to understand the former. This moment in the Fox News studio serves as a microcosm for a much larger phenomenon in American political history: the weaponization of the anti-intellectual persona by highly intellectual figures. We must contextualize Kennedy within a lineage of politicians who mastered this art. Consider Huey Long, the kingfish of Louisiana, who used buffoonery and loud suits to distract from a ruthless and brilliant legal mind. Consider George W. Bush, a Yale and Harvard graduate who successfully cultivated the image of a simple Texas rancher to connect with the heartland and distinguish himself from the intellectual Al Gore and John Kerry. Or Boris Johnson in the UK, whose messy hair and bumbling persona masked a classically trained mind capable of ruthless political maneuvering. Kennedy is the modern heir to this tradition. He understands that in a democracy, being perceived as too smart can be a liability. It creates distance. By wrapping his intellect in the guise of a simple country lawyer, he invites underestimation. And as we saw with Jessica Tarlov, underestimation is a fatal drug. The Tarlov archetype is equally important to dissect here. Jessica Tarlov represents the credentialed elite, a class of political actors who derive their authority from institutions. Her confidence stems from a belief in a meritocratic hierarchy where degrees and data sets are the ultimate arbiters of truth. In her worldview, a policy debate is an engineering problem. If you have the right data and the right experts, you get the right solution. Kennedy represents the pragmatic populist who views politics as a human problem, messy and resistant to sterile academic models. When Tarlov cited the Stanford study, she was appealing to authority. When Kennedy asked about the reality of rural school buses, he was appealing to experience. The collision we witnessed was not just between two people, but between epistemologies, two fundamentally different ways of knowing the truth. The neutral analyst must acknowledge that while Tarlov's approach is valid in a seminar, it is politically brittle. It shatters when faced with raw, tangible reality that contradicts the model. Let's pause to analyze the role of silence again, specifically the 37 seconds mentioned in the hook. In television production, 37 seconds of dead air or tension is an eternity. It creates a vacuum that the audience rushes to fill with their own judgments. During this silence, the power dynamic in the room inverted physically. Tarlov, who began the segment leaning forward, aggressive, occupying space, gradually receded. Her posture collapsed slightly. She crossed her arms, a classic defensive gesture. Kennedy, conversely, remained static. In the animal kingdom, and indeed in human psychology, the alpha figure is often the one who moves the least. Unnecessary movement signals anxiety. Stillness signals control. Kennedy's stillness was a gravity well that pulled all the attention in the room towards him. He forced Tarlov to fidget, to blink, to look away. He won the physical debate before he won the intellectual one. We must also consider the meta-commentary on the media ecosystem itself. This segment was designed to go viral. Fox News producers, watching from the control room, likely recognized the gold they had struck. But why does this specific type of content resonate so deeply? It satisfies the David versus Goliath narrative, but with a twist. Usually, the intellectual is the Goliath and the common man is David. Here, the roles were subverted. The common man revealed he was actually a titan in disguise. It provides a cathartic release for a large segment of the population that feels talked down to by experts. The vindication of the layman is a powerful storytelling trope. When Kennedy asks, "What happens if the story you've been telling yourself is wrong?" he is not just asking Tarlov. He is asking the entire coastal media establishment. He is challenging the bubble. For a neutral observer, this is a fascinating disruption of the feedback loop that usually governs cable news, where guests simply reinforce the biases of their respective audiences. Here, one bias was publicly dismantled. Let's go deeper into the technical aspects of the IQ versus cognition distinction Kennedy made. He corrected Tarlov, stating it wasn't just an IQ test, but a cognitive breakdown. Why is this distinction important? An IQ score is a single number, a blunt instrument. A cognitive breakdown suggests a nuanced map of the mind. By using the more technical term, Kennedy signaled that he respects the science more than she does. He wasn't afraid of the complexity. He embraced it. He effectively said, "I know your game better than you do." This undermines the core of Tarlov's attack, that he is anti-science. It proves he is not anti-science. He is anti-scientism, the blind faith in scientific authority without critical examination. He demonstrated that he could navigate the technical landscape of cognitive psychology, citing specific submetrics like spatial intelligence and working memory. This level of granularity is impossible to fake. It required him to have actually read and understood the report, further reinforcing his preparedness. Now, imagine the counterfactual. What if Tarlov had handled this differently? A skilled strategist in her position, realizing the trap, might have pivoted. She could have said, "Senator, I don't doubt your intelligence. I doubt your application of it to policy." That would have been a safe retreat. It would have shifted the debate back to ideology. But she couldn't make that pivot because she was emotionally compromised. Kennedy's initial questions about folksy charm had successfully baited her into making it personal. He personalized the conflict so that she would attack him, not his ideas. Once the attack is personal, the defense must be personal. By forcing her to attack his brain, he made his brain the battlefield, a battlefield he had already fortified with the envelope. It was a classic rope-a-dope strategy. Lean against the ropes, cover up, let the opponent punch themselves out, and then deliver the counter when they are exhausted. We should also analyze the class warfare subtext. Although Kennedy is a wealthy man and a senator, he successfully coded himself as working class through his defense of rural teachers and underfunded schools. Tarlov, despite her likely genuine concern for education, was coded as out of touch. Kennedy's line, "Reading about a storm doesn't mean you've stood in the rain," is a masterstroke of political copywriting. It encapsulates the resentment of the periphery against the center. It delegitimized the expert class in one sentence. It suggests that proximity to a problem is superior to the study of a problem. Whether this is objectively true is debatable. Often, being too close to a problem prevents one from seeing the systemic solution. However, in the context of a televised debate, the emotional resonance of standing in the rain obliterates the sterile logic of peer-reviewed research. Kennedy claimed the moral high ground of experience, leaving Tarlov stranded on the island of theory. The repercussions of this 60-minute narrative extend beyond the segment. For Tarlov, this was a learning moment in the public eye. To her credit, she eventually accepted the result, however stiffly. But the damage to her brand as the smartest person in the room was significant. For Kennedy, this was a brand-building exercise of the highest order. It solidified his reputation as a dangerous debater, someone who cannot be bullied by the intelligentsia. It likely made other pundits wary of engaging him on similar grounds. In the game theory of cable news booking, Kennedy just increased his deterrence value. Hosts and guests will think twice before challenging his credentials, shifting the window of discourse to ground more favorable to him. Let's examine the checkmate question again. Are you challenging my intelligence because of evidence, or because you assumed a man with my accent couldn't possibly score well? This is a double-bind question. If she says evidence, she has none, as proved by her inability to cite the study's flaws. If she says assumption, she admits to bias. There is no good answer. This is the linguistic equivalent of a pincer movement. Kennedy cut off her supply lines, data, and surrounded her main force, bias. The silence that followed was the sound of a mind searching for an exit door that had been bricked over. It reveals the fragility of modern political discourse, where accusations are often thrown without the structural support to back them up. Kennedy simply walked around the structure and kicked out the load-bearing pillar. Finally, we must ask, was this fair? From a neutral perspective, fairness is irrelevant in political combat. Politics is the contest for power and public perception. Kennedy used deception, hiding his intellect, and theatrics, the envelope, to win. Tarlov used condescension and credentialism to try to win. Kennedy's tactics were simply more effective. He understood the medium of television better. He understood the psychology of the audience better. And ultimately, he understood his opponent better than she understood him. Sun Tzu wrote, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles." Kennedy knew both. Tarlov knew neither. She didn't know the real Kennedy. And perhaps more dangerously, she didn't realize how her own arrogance was being perceived by the camera. She thought she was projecting authority. The camera showed she was projecting elitism. Kennedy thought he was projecting humility. The camera showed he was projecting wisdom. The gap between intent and impact is where political careers are made or broken, and in this segment, that gap was a canyon. We must now widen the aperture of our lens to examine the cultural artifacts that made this exchange not just a moment of television, but a piece of political folklore. Central to this is the phenomenology of the sealed envelope. In the digital age, where information is instantaneous and ephemeral, the presence of a physical, sealed document creates a tangible gravity. It harkens back to an older era of revelation, the reading of a will, the opening of a verdict, the declassification of a secret. Kennedy transformed a standard policy segment into a mystery narrative. By placing the envelope on the table early, he created a focal point that demanded resolution. A neutral analysis of visual media suggests that objects often speak louder than words. The envelope sat there as a silent third participant in the debate, a dormant threat that Tarlov, in her hubris, chose to ignore. Had she acknowledged it, asked about it, or treated it with caution, she might have diffused its power. By pretending it didn't matter, she allowed it to grow in significance until it became the instrument of her undoing. Furthermore, we must dissect this Southern drawl as a tactical asset in American political discourse. Sociolinguists have long studied the phenomenon of linguistic profiling, where certain accents are associated with low intelligence or low status. Kennedy is acutely aware of this bias. He leans into the phonetics of the Deep South, the elongated vowels, the soft consonants, the deliberate pacing. To the untrained ear, particularly the urban coastal ear, this sounds like a lack of urgency or a lack of processing speed. In reality, it is a pacing mechanism. It forces the listener to slow down, to lean in, and to underestimate the speaker. In military strategy, this is akin to camouflage. Kennedy cloaks his Oxford education in the vocal patterns of rural Louisiana. When Tarlov attacked his intelligence, she was attacking the camouflage, not the tank hidden underneath. This is a critical error in target identification. She fired her shots at the decoy, leaving the actual target, his intellect, unscathed and ready to return fire with overwhelming force. Let us also consider the broader implication of the expert versus local dynamic. This segment went viral because it touched on a raw nerve in the current American psyche, the crisis of credibility among the expert class. For decades, the technocratic elite has argued that complex problems, economy, education, public health, should be left to those with the credentials to understand them. Tarlov voiced this worldview explicitly. Expertise matters, data matters. However, a significant portion of the electorate feels that this class has failed them. They see declining test scores despite higher spending. They see economic metrics that don't match their grocery bills. Kennedy tapped into this dissonance. When he juxtaposed New York seminars with rural school buses, he was not just making a geographic comparison. He was making a competency argument. He was suggesting that abstract knowledge is inferior to situational knowledge. For the neutral observer, this is a powerful rhetorical pivot. It allows the populace to claim they are the true experts because they understand the ground truth, while dismissing the academic expert as living in a simulation. The reaction of the other panelists serves as a proxy for the fractured media landscape. Brad Stevens' amusement and Jesse Waters' anticipation highlight the entertainment value of political conflict. They knew they were watching good TV. This raises an uncomfortable question for the serious analyst. Has political debate ceased to be about persuasion and become entirely about owning the opponent? In this instance, yes. Kennedy did not convince Tarlov to change her mind on education funding. Tarlov did not convince Kennedy to support federal oversight. The goal was not consensus, the goal was dominance. Kennedy achieved dominance by proving he could play Tarlov's game, standardized testing, better than she could, while she could not play his game, relatability. The exchange confirms that in the modern attention economy, the ability to humiliate an opponent is often valued higher than the ability to legislate effectively. This is a cynical but necessary conclusion for any objective observer of U.S. politics. We must also look at the data trap. Tarlov demanded data, and she got it. But she got the wrong kind of data for her narrative. She wanted policy data. She got personal cognitive data. This illustrates a vulnerability in the fact-check culture. There is a belief that if you just have enough facts, you win. Kennedy demonstrated that context controls facts. The fact of his high IQ score didn't just prove he was smart. In the context of her insults, it proved she was prejudiced. He weaponized the fact to destroy her narrative frame. This is a sophisticated maneuver known as reframing. He took the energy of her attack, her demand for rigorous testing, and used it to power his own defense. It is the political equivalent of Aikido. A neutral analyst must admire the efficiency of the move, regardless of the ideology behind it. He didn't fight the test. He embraced the test and used the results to suffocate her argument. There is also a lesson here about the assumption of superiority. Tarlov assumed that because her side owns the issue of education and science, she naturally owned the intellectual high ground. This is a dangerous complacency. Political movements often rot from the inside when they stop fearing their opposition. If you believe your opponents are simply stupid, you stop preparing for them. You stop sharpening your arguments. You rely on shorthand and signaling, "I have the degrees," rather than substance. Kennedy exposed this rot. He showed that the opposition is reading the same books, taking the same tests, and perhaps understanding them better. This moment should serve as a wake-up call to Democratic strategists. The caricature of the dumb Republican is a strategic liability. It leads to laziness in debate and catastrophe in execution. When you assume the other side is incapable of complex thought, you leave yourself wide open to a complex ambush. Let's analyze the micro-expressions during the reveal. High-definition television captures everything. As Kennedy read the numbers, Tarlov's face went through a sequence of emotions: skepticism, realization, shock, and finally, a mask of forced neutrality. She could not storm off. She could not scream. She had to sit there and take it. This forced endurance is often more damaging than an outburst. It showed her powerlessness. Kennedy, meanwhile, kept his eyes on the paper, only looking up at the end. This lack of eye contact during the reading was a power move. It said, "The numbers are the authority here, not you." By deferring to the paper, he depersonalized the victory, making it harder for her to attack him back. He wasn't saying, "I'm smarter than you." He was saying, "The paper says I'm smarter than you thought." It externalized the conflict, shielding him from accusations of arrogance while maximizing the impact of the score. The 37 seconds of silence mentioned in the intro acts as a structural pivot point. In narrative theory, this is the dark night of the soul for the antagonist. Tarlov had to sit in that silence and contemplate the possibility of her own public execution. The producers let the silence linger because they understood the tension curve. A shorter silence would have felt rushed. A longer one might have felt awkward. 37 seconds was the exact amount of time needed for the audience to process the stakes. It allowed the viewer to ask themselves, what if he actually does it? It transformed the segment from a shout fest into a thriller. For a scriptwriter or political consultant, this pacing is the gold standard. It demonstrates that you don't need constant noise to hold an audience. You need stakes. The sealed envelope provided the stakes. The silence provided the suspense. We should also consider the after-action report on credibility. How does a commentator recover from this? In the old days of media, such a humiliation might have ended a career. In the fragmented modern landscape, Tarlov likely retreated to her base, who would argue that IQ tests are flawed or that Kennedy tricked her. Kennedy's base, meanwhile, enshrined this moment as legend. This reinforces the two realities thesis of American politics. There is no longer a single shared public square where a winner is universally declared. However, among the undecided, that shrinking sliver of persuadable voters, moments like this matter. They create a vibe or an impression. The impression left here is that the populist right is sharper, funnier, and more authentic than the technocratic left. That is a dangerous impression for the Democrats to allow to fester, especially in an election cycle driven by anti-incumbent sentiment. Let's delve into the specific cognitive metrics Kennedy cited: spatial intelligence and pattern recognition. These are not typically associated with law or politics. They are associated with engineering and strategy. By citing these, Kennedy hinted at a brain that sees structures and systems, not just words. This subtly reinforces the idea that he sees the big picture, the patterns, that Tarlov misses because she is too focused on the minutiae. It frames him as a strategist and her as a bureaucrat. Whether accurate or not, it is a compelling narrative frame. It suggests that while she is reading the rulebook, he is reading the board. This distinction between rule follower and game player is central to the appeal of the disruptor politician. The audience loves a player who knows the rules well enough to beat the rule makers at their own game. Finally, we must touch upon the gender dynamics without falling into cliches. Tarlov, a younger woman, was lecturing an older man. In some contexts, this looks like speaking truth to power. But because Kennedy played the role of the gentle grandfather so well, Tarlov's aggression backfired. It didn't look like punching up, it looked like badgering. Kennedy's refusal to raise his voice or interrupt her created a contrast that made her appear shrill, even if her volume was normal. He controlled the tone of the engagement. By remaining soft-spoken, he forced her to either lower her voice and lose her momentum, or keep it raised and look aggressive. She chose the latter, and visually, it alienated her. A neutral analyst sees this not just as a gender issue, but as a tonal trap. Kennedy set the volume of the debate at a 3. Tarlov came in at an 8. In a duet, the mismatched volume makes the louder singers sound out of tune. Kennedy forced her to be out of tune with the room. As we move toward the final act of this analysis, we have to ask, what does this mean for the future of political debate? It suggests that the era of gotcha questions is evolving. Politicians are becoming more media-savvy than the journalists covering them. They are learning to produce their own viral moments within the context of hostile interviews. Kennedy's envelope was a form of producer intervention by the guest. He essentially took over the role of the showrunner, introducing a prop and a plot twist that the actual producers hadn't planned for. This shift in power, where the subject controls the medium, is the defining characteristic of the new media age. The envelope is a symbol of that control. It represents the ability to curate one's own narrative in real time, bypassing the filters of the pundit class. The Kennedy maneuver serves as a case study for any public figure facing a hostile interviewer. The steps were: 1. Invite the attack, the bait. 2. Raise the stakes, the wager. 3. Secure the commitment, the lock-in. 4. Reveal the evidence, the turn. 5. Show mercy, the release. It is a 5-act structure compressed into 10 minutes. Most politicians fail at step 1, they get defensive, or step 5, they gloat. Kennedy's execution of all 5 steps suggests a level of discipline that is rare. It turns a political segment into a morality play. And in a morality play, the character who embodies hubris, Tarlov, must always fall to the character who embodies prudence, Kennedy. This is ancient storytelling code hardwired into the human brain, and Kennedy hacked it perfectly. Let's pivot our analysis to the concept of performance architecture. Every political interaction is a performance, but the successful ones hide the scaffolding. Jessica Tarlov's performance was visible. You could see her trying to score points. You could see her checking off the boxes of the liberal commentator checklist. Mention data. Check. Mention credentials. Check. Look skeptical. Check. It felt rehearsed. Kennedy's performance was invisible. It felt organic, like he just happened to have an envelope in his pocket and just happened to remember a specific study. Of course, a neutral analyst knows this is false. Kennedy's performance was likely more rehearsed than Tarlov's. But the illusion of spontaneity is the currency of trust. In the uncanny valley of television politics, the person who looks like they are acting always loses to the person who looks like they are being. Kennedy mastered the art of being the confused old man right up until the moment he needed to be the sharp prosecutor. This transition is jarring for the opponent because it breaks the continuity of their own performance. Tarlov didn't know which Kennedy she was fighting, the character or the actor, until it was too late. We must also scrutinize the venue variable. This happened on the 5 on Fox News. The table is round or curved, creating a sense of intimacy but also enclosing the combatants. Tarlov is the designated liberal seat. Her role in the show's ecosystem is to be the punching bag or the foil. She knows this. This structural disadvantage often makes the occupant of that seat overcompensate. They feel the need to be sharper, louder, and more aggressive because they are outnumbered 4-1. Kennedy used this structural pressure against her. He knew she felt besieged. He knew she felt the need to prove her intellectual superiority to a hostile room. By attacking his intelligence, she wasn't just attacking him. She was trying to assert dominance over the entire Fox News demographic. Kennedy understood that he didn't need to defeat her with logic. He just needed to let her arrogance alienate the audience. He let the venue do the work. He let the us versus them dynamic simmer until she boiled over. A neutral observer sees that Tarlov was fighting a war on two fronts, one against Kennedy and one against the format of the show itself. She lost both. Let's draw a historical parallel to understand the power of the prop. In 2012, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu used a cartoon bomb diagram at the UN to explain the Iranian nuclear threat. It was mocked by elites but understood instantly by the masses. In 1988, George H.W. Bush used a bag of crack cocaine, purchased by the DEA, in a televised address to visceralize the drug war. Props simplify complex narratives. Kennedy's envelope belongs in this lineage. It took an abstract concept, cognitive capability, and turned it into a physical object. You can't argue with an envelope. It sits there defying spin. If Kennedy had just said, "I scored high," Tarlov would have said, "Prove it." The envelope was the proof, existing in the physical space before the verbal claim was even made. It short-circuited the usual, he said, she said, cycle of cable news. It introduced evidentiary weight into a medium that usually floats on hot air. For the neutral analyst, the lesson is clear. In a debate of words, bring a thing. A thing anchors the truth in reality. Now, let's examine the psychology of the audience proxy. We mentioned the other hosts, but let's look closer at why they matter. Brad Stevens and Jesse Waters represent the in-group. When they laugh or lean in, they give the audience permission to do the same. But Tarlov is the out-group. Psychologically, humans are hardwired to enjoy the humiliation of the out-group, especially when the out-group member displays hubris. This is the tall poppy syndrome weaponized. Tarlov positioned herself as a tall poppy, morally and intellectually superior. Kennedy played the role of the gardener with the shears. The satisfaction the audience feels is not necessarily ideological. It is primal. It is the satisfaction of seeing hierarchy leveled. Even a liberal viewer, if they are honest, might feel a twinge of schadenfreude, joy in another's misfortune, watching someone walk so blindly into a trap. Kennedy provided a masterclass in how to trigger this primal response without looking like a bully. He let her bully him first, so his retaliation looked like justice rather than aggression. We should also deconstruct the linguistic trap of the word smart. Throughout the exchange, the definition of smart shifted. To Tarlov, smart meant academic fluency and adherence to consensus. To Kennedy, smart meant situational awareness and strategic foresight. The envelope revealed that Kennedy possessed the capacity for Tarlov's definition. He has the raw IQ, but chose to operate by his own. This is a crucial distinction. It suggests that his folksiness is a stylistic choice, not a cognitive necessity. This creates a sense of hidden depths. Characters with hidden depths are infinitely more compelling than one-dimensional archetypes. Tarlov was one-dimensional. She was exactly what she appeared to be. Kennedy was multidimensional. He was a layer of molasses over a core of steel. In storytelling, the audience always roots for the character with the secret. Kennedy's secret was the score. By withholding it, he cast himself as the protagonist of the segment. Let's analyze the risk calculation. What if Kennedy had opened the envelope and the score was average? Say 60th percentile? He would have looked ridiculous. The fact that he brought it means he knew the score was unassailable. This implies a high degree of self-awareness. Most politicians are narcissists who overestimate their abilities. Kennedy relied on an objective, third-party assessment. This reliance on external validation, the test, paradoxically made him seem more confident than Tarlov, who relied on internal validation. I know I'm qualified. Kennedy trusted the data more than she did. He bet his reputation on the numbers. She bet her reputation on her feelings. In a twist of irony, the Republican became the empiricist and the Democrat became the emotionalist. This inversion of stereotypes is why the clip endures. It disrupts our mental models of how these political tribes are supposed to behave. Consider the Socratic irony employed by Kennedy. Socrates famously pretended to be ignorant to encourage others to make complex statements he could then dismantle. Kennedy's questions: name one limitation of the study. What is the difference between correlation and causation? Were Socratic in nature. He wasn't asking for information. He was testing her knowledge foundation. When she faltered, he didn't correct her immediately. He let the silence do the correcting. He let the audience realize that the expert didn't know the answer. This is far more damaging than simply shouting, "You're wrong." If you tell someone they are wrong, they get defensive. If you ask them a question they can't answer, they get exposed. Kennedy used questions as battering rams, breaking down the gate of her authority before marching in with the envelope to occupy the citadel. We must also look at the viral mechanics of the aftermath. Why did this specific 60 minutes of content generate millions of views? It follows the structure of a reveal video, a popular genre on YouTube, e.g., gender reveals, unboxing videos, makeover reveals. The human brain loves a reveal. The envelope promised a dopamine hit, the moment of opening. The entire dialogue leading up to it was just foreplay. Kennedy understood the pacing of a reveal. He teased it. He touched it. He almost opened it, then stopped. He maximized the time on site, attention span, of the viewer. A less savvy politician would have opened it in the first minute to prove a point. Kennedy waited until minute 59, metaphorically speaking. He maximized the suspense. This indicates a deep understanding of the attention economy. In the attention economy, you don't win by being right. You win by being watched. Kennedy ensured he would be watched until the very last second. Let's tackle the ethical dimension from a neutral standpoint. Is it ethical to ambush a colleague on live TV? In the context of The Five, yes. The show is built on conflict. It is a gladiator arena. There are no rules of civility that prohibit props or surprise evidence. Tarlov knows the game. However, there is a code of the duel. Kennedy adhered to it by giving her multiple chances to back down. He asked, "Are you sure?" multiple times. He warned her. In moral philosophy, this is informed consent. He ensured she consented to her own destruction. This absolves him of the charge of cruelty. A cruel man traps the innocent. A strategist traps the willing. Tarlov was a willing participant in the escalation. She chose to double down. Therefore, the ethical burden of the humiliation lies on her shoulders, not his. He merely provided the mirror. She chose to look into it. Finally, we should consider the legacy of the envelope. This prop will likely follow Kennedy for the rest of his career. It has become part of his iconography, like Lincoln's stovepipe hat or Churchill's cigar. It signifies hidden intelligence. It warns future opponents. I have receipts. It creates a psychological force field around him. In future debates, opponents will wonder, what does he have in his pocket today? This paranoia is a strategic asset. It makes opponents cautious. It slows them down. It forces them to second-guess their attacks. Kennedy bought himself a permanent psychological advantage for the price of a manila envelope and a sheet of paper. That is an ROI, return on investment, that any economist or politician would envy. To fully appreciate the resonance of this moment, we must look beyond politics and into the deep-seated cultural mythology of America. Senator Kennedy isn't just playing a politician. He is channeling a specific, beloved archetype, the Southern lawyer. This figure, immortalized in pop culture by characters like Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird or Ben Matlock in the TV series Matlock, holds a unique place in the American psyche. The archetype is defined by a specific duality, a disarming, slow-moving exterior that masks a razor-sharp, justice-seeking interior. When Kennedy engages with Tarlov, he is subconsciously triggering this narrative frame in the minds of millions of viewers, particularly those over the age of 40. In the Matlock formula, the city slickers, prosecutors, corporate types, experts, always underestimate the protagonist because of his seersucker suit and his love for hot dogs. They view him as a relic. But by the end of the hour, the relic has outsmarted the modern machine. Kennedy knows this script by heart. By allowing Tarlov to play the role of the city slicker, impatient, credentialed, and condescending, he casts himself as the hero of a drama that Americans have been watching for decades. A neutral analysis suggests this is not accidental. Kennedy's team likely understands that policy arguments are boring, but character arcs are addictive. By stepping into the Matlock shoes, he bypasses the audience's political filter and appeals to their narrative instinct. They root for him not because they agree with his vote on the budget, but because they are conditioned to root for the old lawyer who catches the arrogant witness in a lie. The anesthetic of humor. How laughter disarms the gatekeepers. We must also expand our lens to analyze a weapon Kennedy employs that Tarlov completely lacks in this exchange: humor. Throughout his career, and subtly in this clip, Kennedy uses folksy metaphors, comparing himself to bad gumbo or a drunk at a wedding. In political negotiation, self-deprecating humor acts as a psychological anesthetic. It lowers the cortisol levels of the opponent and the audience. It signals, "I am not a threat. I am just a goofy old man." This makes the opponent drop their guard. Tarlov, serious and intense, treats the debate as a life-and-death struggle for truth. Kennedy treats it as a conversation at a barber shop. When the envelope is finally revealed, the devastation is amplified by this contrast. If Kennedy had been angry and serious, the audience would have viewed him as just another partisan warrior. But because he was funny and light leading up to the kill, the blow landed harder. It's the difference between being hit by a boxer you're staring down and being hit by a clown who just handed you a balloon. The surprise factor is total. For the neutral observer, this highlights a critical deficiency in modern woke or progressive discourse: the inability to be funny. By taking themselves with deadly seriousness, figures like Tarlov make themselves brittle. They cannot bend, so they break. Kennedy, loose and humorous, is flexible. He absorbs the attack, laughs it off, and then strikes back. In the attention economy, the person having the most fun usually wins the frame. Kennedy looked like he was having fun. Tarlov looked like she was enduring a root canal. The digital afterlife and the algorithm of humiliation. We cannot ignore the technological context of this ambush. This segment aired on linear television, but it was designed for the vertical screen of a smartphone. The structure of the interaction, the setup, the challenge, the silence, the reveal, is perfectly optimized for the algorithms of TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts. These platforms reward high-retention content. The mystery of the sealed envelope acts as a retention hook, keeping users from scrolling away. A 45-minute policy speech gets 1,000 views. This 5-minute clip gets 10 million views. Why? Because it captures a status reversal. Social media thrives on videos where a bully gets punched or a master gets outplayed by a novice. The algorithm doesn't care about the validity of the IQ test. It cares about the emotional spike of the reveal. Kennedy's team understands that the real battle isn't for the 3 million people watching Fox News Live. It's for the 30 million people who will see the clip on Twitter the next morning. By creating a visual, prop-heavy moment, they created clickbait. Tarlov, focused on the argument in the room, failed to see the argument on the feed. She was playing for the studio audience. Kennedy was playing for the internet. This divergence in target audience explains why Kennedy seemed so unbothered by her immediate pushback. He knew that the clip would cut out her nuances and leave only her stunned silence. He was editing the viral video in his head while the cameras were still rolling. The staff work factor. The invisible hand. A truly neutral deep dive must acknowledge the unseen actors, the staff. That envelope didn't materialize out of thin air. Somewhere, a team of opposition researchers and communications directors sat down and wargamed this scenario. They likely pulled transcripts of Tarlov's past comments. They likely identified her trigger words regarding intelligence and education. They scheduled the cognitive test, ensured the results were sealed, and briefed Kennedy on exactly when to deploy it. This reveals the industrial scale of modern political theater. This wasn't a moment of individual brilliance. It was a moment of institutional competence. It suggests that Kennedy's operation is running at a higher level of sophistication than many realize. While Tarlov is operating as a pundit, reactive, opinion-based, Kennedy is operating as a candidate, proactive, intel-based. The difference in preparation levels was stark. Tarlov brought her brain, Kennedy brought a dossier. For the aspiring political analyst, the lesson is clear: spontaneity is a myth. The most real moments in politics are often the most heavily produced. The genius lies in hiding the production value. Kennedy hid the team, the research, and the strategy inside a simple, crumpled manila envelope, making it look like a personal triumph rather than a staff victory. The death of the gotcha question. Finally, this interaction marks a potential turning point in the journalist-politician power dynamic. The death of the gotcha question. For decades, The media has held the power to ambush politicians with surprise questions or gotcha facts. Tarlov attempted a classic gotcha by demanding an IQ test, expecting Kennedy to recoil. Instead, Kennedy reversed the current. He turned the gotcha back on the questioner. This signals a shift where politicians are no longer fearful of the media's framing power. They are learning to hack the interview. If a politician can bring their own props, their own data, and their own sealed results, the journalist loses their monopoly on the truth. We are moving into an era of asymmetric media warfare, where the subject of the interview might be more prepared than the interviewer. Kennedy demonstrated that the best defense against a media ambush is not a shield, but a hidden sword. This will likely lead to a more cautious media class, afraid to issue challenges they can't control. The chilling effect of this 60-minute saga will be felt in green rooms across Washington. Don't ask him to prove it, because he might just do it. As we conclude this deep dive, we return to the central thesis. The Kennedy-Tarlov incident was a collision between style and substance, where style, Tarlov's polished delivery, was shattered by substance, Kennedy's raw data. It serves as a reminder that in the high-definition era, there is nowhere to hide. Your degree won't save you, your accent won't save you, and your assumptions won't save you. Only the truth, cold, hard, and sealed in an envelope, remains standing when the lights go out. The neutral analyst closes the file not with a judgment of who is good or bad, but with a nod of respect to the player who understood the game, mastered the rules, and executed the play with flawless precision. In the chaotic theater of American politics, competence is the rarest currency of all, and for 60 minutes, John Kennedy was the richest man in the room.